The main legal trend that we're definitely seeing is more caution from buyers in their due diligence and in deploying their capital. So we're seeing areas such as environmental, social, and governance due diligence from clients, and other areas of diligence which can result in transactions taking longer to consummate. Another area that we're definitely seeing as a trend is the consolidation of different industries. For example, in Ireland at the moment, accountancy practices are being bought up, veterinary practices, different areas like that. Before, we saw insurers, we saw nursing homes. So there's a definite consolidation in the market happening with different bolt-ons being acquired, and we expect that trend to continue. There's a very important piece of legislation coming into force very shortly in Ireland from a transactions point of view. And that's our first ever foreign direct investment screening legislation, which has now been signed into law and is expected to come into force in the second quarter of 2024. And what that will mean is that a lot of transactions that currently do not require a consent, regulatory consent, or a split signing and closing will require a consent. And I think, around that, it's quite wide as drafted. There's a low financial threshold of 2 million, and transactions involving third-party undertakings as acquirers will be caught. And the actual scope of the types of transactions that will be caught is very wide. So it's definitely a very significant piece of legislation and will need to be considered very carefully prior to parties undertaking transactions. When there is a split signing and closing required because of this, the competent authority will have a 90-day window to actually consider the notification and give its approval or otherwise. So all in all, it's something that's going to change the landscape somewhat in terms of deals in Ireland until it settles down. I spoke earlier about the increased scrutiny that's happening in due diligence processes on transactions in Ireland at the moment. And I think in order to help with that, if any client is considering selling their business or taking investment into their business, it's really important to be prepared in advance of the process. That means having a well-organized data room. It means populating a standard due diligence request list in advance of the transaction, because momentum can really stall things if those requests come up and preparation hasn't been done in advance. So that's a key thing that a seller or an investee of a business can do to help themselves moving into 2024. I spoke earlier on about the new foreign direct investment screening legislation that's coming in probably in Q2 of 2024. And there's a couple of issues with that I think it would be really helpful if perhaps they could be looked at a little bit to help with the ease of transacting in the jurisdiction. One aspect of that is that there's a 90-day window, which I mentioned earlier, which under the legislation, the competent authority will have in order to decide whether to approve the transaction or otherwise. And when you compare that to the current CCPC or competition approval required for some transactions, there's a 30 business day window. And for those involved with transactions where sometimes such consent is required, that is a long time, and for parties to potentially have to wait so much longer is not, I think, going to be welcome. I think the other part that would be very helpful with the new regime is some further clarification around the scope of the regime. I think that it's absolutely understandable and correct that critical defence, critical infrastructure, and so forth, that there would be some sort of regulatory oversight of new investments or acquisitions in that space coming from third country undertakings. However, as drafted, it's extremely wide, and the danger is that a lot of transactions that have really no impact on what's trying to be caught will have to be notified in the abundance of caution, given that it's voidable otherwise and a criminal offence if you don't. So I think that those are the two areas that will be very helpful in terms of transactions in 2024 and beyond if they could be looked at.